Okay, so we're down to our last talk for this part of our session. So finally, we zoom out to the collective scale with intelligent enough, evaluating collective action in HOT, tasking manager mapping projects by Dagoberto Jose Herrera Murillo, but his colleagues are not here. So Hector Ochoa Ortiz will be presenting on their behalf. This study asks what collective intelligence really looks like in the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team's tasking manager projects by examining who contributes, how work is organized, and whether group action leads to intelligent outcomes. The study uncovers both strengths and challenges.
So, hi everyone, I'm Hector. I've been a mapper of OSM for 14 years already, so quite a long time. I'm also a director, a member of the board of directors at the OpenStreetMap Foundation, but I'm not here representing the foundation in this case. Here I'm representing my university, so I'm a PhD student at the University of Camerino in Italy. And this is a work that we did together with the University of Zaragoza in Spain. And in fact, this is more Dagoberto's topic, and it's his PhD topic, which is about the interface of open data in general, although we focused a lot on the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team tasking manager. So next one. Yeah. So this is the tool that we studied in depth, the hot tasking manager. As you may know, it's a tool developed by the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to distribute the tasks, especially when there's a lot of people mapping at the same place for humanitarian purposes, so that different users, when mapping, they kind of map and don't get into conflicts while mapping the same area, right? And we wanted to relate this interface, this tool, together with the framework of collective intelligence. So does anybody here have heard about the term collective intelligence before? Yes, some. Yeah, there's the wisdom of the crowd. So for the wisdom of the crowd says that a group of people, they may do something better than an individual that could be an expert in the topic, but a group of people together may do better than them, right? And in this case, we chose this definition by Malone and Bernstein, that the collective intelligence can be defined as a group of individuals or groups of individuals that are acting collectively in ways that seem intelligent. And we relate this definition to the research question, which is the next slide. So it's always good to have funny pictures. So what characterizes the group of individuals that is in the definition collaborating in the hot TM mapping projects? How is the collective action organized within this project? And what evidence of intelligent action can be identified in this setting with the tasking manager? In our methodology, we first did the data collection and then the data analysis. We got the hot tasking manager logs. They have an API. You can just query the API and download from there. We got 746 projects. That is, so we got from December 2021 until December 2023, which is when we started doing this research. And we got all the projects that were fully completed between those 2 years, right? That equates to 8,800 contributors, 300,000 tasks, and 1 million of task states that these tasks go through. We also got some OSM data about the buildings, but this is not very relevant in this work, but more in other work that we did previously. And of course, we wanted to answer the question. So for the first research question, what characterizes the group of individuals? We generated some descriptive statistics of their contributor profiles in the tasking manager. For collective actions, we did some process mining applied to the task states and the logs of each task. And then for the what evidence of intelligent action, we did a logistic regression to determine factors associated with the task validation and invalidation. So the first question, what characterizes the group of individuals collaborating in the tasking manager mapping projects? So we can see that most of the contributors are in fact beginners, right? So 91% of the contributors are beginners. And we selected the categories chosen by the tasking manager. And the categories by the task manager says that beginners are less than 250 change sets, intermediate up to 500, and advanced more than 500, right? And we see that intermediate and advanced together is more or less 9%. And if we see the number of projects that they contribute in, we see that, of course, beginners just contribute in average into one project and then don't contribute again. Meanwhile, advanced users, of course, contribute to a lot of hot projects, an average of 35, a median of 12, right? We also wanted to see how much did they interact with the tool. So, for example, we got the details on how much did they fill in their profiles inside the tool, right? So to see if they actually played around with the tool a little bit. And we see, of course, that beginner users have only 41% of them have their name completed, only 28% the city, country, and other details. But intermediate and advanced users do much better in completing all the details. So they play around with the tool a little bit more, right? Then also we wanted to see if the mappers were actually from the countries they were mapping, right? Or if they were from somewhere else. And we divided it by different hubs. So some years ago, HOT started splitting into different hubs to cater more the needs of the different regions in the world. But we can see that still most of the mappers are from the global north, especially from United States and United Kingdom, although we see some regional differences as well. So, for example, in Asia Pacific, we see that Nepal and India contributing a lot because they're also from the region of Asia Pacific, right? The same can be seen for Western Northern Africa. Nigeria is contributing a lot because they're in Western Northern Africa. There's a big difference, though, in Latin America and the Caribbean, where Philippines is contributing a lot. We exactly thanks, Philippines, for contributing a lot. We're not sure exactly why, but we're thinking that probably there's a lot of mapping parties that you guys have been doing here in the Philippines. So thank you for this. Also, same Eastern and Southern Africa. Kenya is contributing a lot because they're in Eastern Africa. So next. Yes. Now that we know who is contributing to this mapping project, that was the first research question, we now want to know how are they contributing, right? So, and how are they contributing collectively? So we wanted to see with the beginner and advanced users that there are in each project in average, and the tasks that they've been doing, if they are doing the same tasks as the other type of users, right? Or if there's some tasks that they're doing more than other type of users. And we see that most of the tasks, so log for mapping, mapped, they're done more or less equally in both sides, except, of course, in the challenging projects, because, of course, beginners are not usually mapping in challenging projects, because most of the time they're actually locked for beginners, so that you cannot map on them. But there are two that stand out. One is auto unlocked for mapping. What does auto unlock for mapping mean? This is one of the task states that is in the logs of the tasking manager. Auto unlock for mapping means that a user forgot to unlock the mapping. So they've been mapping, and then they didn't say that it's finished, or they didn't say that it's not finished. They just forgot it. And 2 hours later, the system automatically unlocks you. So that means that you maybe do not know how to use the tool too much, and you just log and forget to unlock it later. And that is happening, of course, a lot on beginners, right? Much more than advanced. But other tasks like splitting, which is more decisive task, is done more by advanced users rather than beginner users, right? And as well, we don't see really a difference between the urgency of the tasks. We see similar numbers irrespective of the urgency of the task. Maybe some change in bad imagery, but the rest are pretty similar. So next. We also analyze the tasks. So how do the tasks move from one state to the next? And we see that the task starts, and then usually, yeah, it gets locked for mapping. Sometimes it gets locked for mapping again, so it goes through several mappers. and then it goes towards mapped, and then it goes towards validation, then it's validated, and it ends. We could talk about maybe, so for example, there's a bottleneck in validation, but that was mostly from a different work that we did. Here, about collective action, what we can see is that there's a huge main, let's say, flow of the task. So the task usually gets locked, and then most of the times it just gets locked by one person, and then it moves towards validation, right? So most of the time, there's no handover of tasks. There's just one person that maps, one person who validates, and then it's validated. Only in a few cases does the task get invalidated. It's just a very few percentage of cases, and in a also a small percentage, but not so small, it gets mapped by several people. So can we define this as collective action? Maybe not, because a lot of the times just one single person is mapping and then one single person is validating. So it depends also on how do we define this collective action. But if we define it as just mapping in the exact same area or mapping the same elements, then it's not really doing that. What the tool is mostly doing is separating the mapping, so different people map different places at the same time, but not that people map the same area, right? So it's kind of, the tool is kind of forcing this in a way. So while tasking manager is making the mapping happen in parallel and happen quite fast, it is not really forcing people to edit the same area multiple times, right? Next. Yes. So, however, we see that whenever a task gets splitted or invalidated, there are more mappers mapping in that task, usually because the task is more complex. So in a previous work, we saw that the areas that get splitted the most are those where after the mapping, there's a huge density of building. So there are areas that usually have a huge density of building, so they're a bit more difficult to map, and they get reduced into smaller areas to map. And we see whenever a task gets splitted, there's an average of 5.9 contributors, mappers, mapping that task. Meanwhile, when it doesn't get split, it's just 1.4. So most of the time, it's just one person. When it gets invalidated as well, because it goes through the loop of mapping again, then we see more contributors and more mappers going through the same task. And when, of course, both happen as well. And in the validation as well, most of the times, it just gets validated by one person and it goes through as validated. But whenever there's an invalidation or a split, the average goes up as well. Next one. Here we mapped as well according to the number of beginners and number of advanced users that we have. What is the expected handover of these tasks? So if we see a highlighted number, we see that there's a huge divergence between what we expect, depending on the number of task states that we see by beginners and by advanced, and what we are actually seeing, right? So, for example, we see that when the task goes from beginner to beginner, way more than expected. So we expected the 28% of handovers, but in reality, there's a 49% of handovers. Meanwhile, from advanced to beginners is the other way around. So advanced people tend to give the task to beginners less than expected per the number of advanced people that there are. And that happens irrespectively of the difficulty of the challenge. So that happens in both easy and moderate challenges. In challenging, they're not beginners, usually. And that also happens irrespectively of the urgency of the task. So in all cases, advanced are giving less to beginners than they should, and beginners are giving more to beginners than expected. Next. Yes. And then for the last question, we did a logistic regression for the validation state of a task, where we wanted to see what different variables could influence the invalidation of a task. So we saw that what is influencing the most the invalidation of a task is the priority. So in urgent projects, the tasks 15% of tasks get invalidated. As well, this is happening on challenging projects. Of course, challenging projects, tasks get more invalidated than on easy projects. But there's also some really interesting case here, which is the validation time. So how long is the validation time? And we see that when the validation time is higher than the median, so when a validator is validating for a long time, then there's very few invalidations. Why is this happening? Because the validator is acting as a second mapper. So the validator is actually mapping as if it were a second mapper. Instead of sending it back to the mapping phase, fixing it, and then it's not invalidated, it's just validated. It's perfect, right? And also, we also see some other interesting thing here. Whenever there are multiple mappers as well, there are more invalidations. So in the end, we're seeing that it's not so much intelligence action, it's not so much handover, but just one person and then sometimes a second person just fixing it, and that's it, and then it goes through. This has some problems though that I cannot show here because it's the next thing that we're researching on, but we are researching on the issues that the interface is inserting in the data. So because we are separating the data into grids, this creates some issues in the final data, especially around the borders. So we want to measure if that's the case and for how much. But what we're thinking is that the tasking manager is not really making people collaborate so much, at least in the same areas, but rather making the mapping of an area faster and in parallel between a lot of people, and not focusing so much on the final quality and final collective action of that. So next one, please. So yeah, HotTM, Task Manager, is doing exactly that, rapidly mobilizing volunteers to contribute data, but it's evenly distributed. We're relying a lot on experienced contributors. The advanced contributors are not given to beginners, and the advanced contributors are also doing the validations and sometimes using the mapper. It's not really a wisdom of the crowd. It's a wisdom of the few. The advanced contributors are doing most of the work and most of the mapping, and the beginners just come, map once, and leave. Also, we saw that there's a little engagement of local mappers. Most of the mappers come from global north, especially from United States and United Kingdom. We miss in the context of edits, so maybe we need that local context, and it's good that HOT is changing to bring that local context. And next. So yeah, and then some suggestions that we have for the tasking manager: enhancing the onboarding and mentorship, so accelerate that transition from beginner to advanced. So having more people edit more times could help a lot. Also incentivize meaningful collaboration. There's only task handover and there's not too much of it. So could there be some ways to make people contribute better and contribute collectively on the same area? And how can we integrate also that local knowledge more effectively? Maybe there could be a reward of contributors of locals or thematic experts. And yeah, you can read the full journal paper. We published this, and it got published like a couple of months ago. You also have the code if you want to run the whole code, download the data, run the statistics. Everything is open in there. So yeah, thank you for everything, and I hope you like it. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. If you want to contact Dagoberto, He's the main researcher in here. He did all the statistics. He knows way more of the statistics than I do. I did mostly the data extracting and processing. But yeah, it's
All right. Thank you, Hector. So the floor is now open for questions. I don't see much yet in Venuless. So if you're thinking of a question, you can ask them, put them there, or ask them here now. Like Radin.
Okay, thank you for your work. I have for my question is, uh, how do you know or how do you find a country of origin of mapper, because it's not mandatory to fill it in Tasking Manager.
yeah, it's not mandatory, and we actually say that most of the users don't add it, but we only took into account the users who add it.
Okay, and what is the percentage of people who do you know?
Was so for advanced 50% more or less, and for
Okay, so okay, thank you. And my second question, probably it was in the presentation, maybe I missed it. What portion of beginners was they in type they mapped one time and left and never?
so we do not have the exact proportion. If you go back, I think, here, but the median is just one. So most of them just come once and leave. The average, the mean is 1.9, so still some a little bit more,
Okay.
but still the most repeated values is
Okay.
All right. Thanks. Okay. So there's one more question in Venuless. Well, it seems that it's not so much of a collective intelligence, but more of a divide and conquer thing, right? Okay. So this question with this research, is there still collective action, and would it be possible in the future?
I mean, as far as how the tasking manager is designed right now, I don't think it's so possible. But if we change maybe tasking manager, especially, so what I'm thinking is that tasking manager works well for the current use cases when we're responding to an emergency, where we want just like to be fast, right, and have something. But maybe we could create a second or a different version of the tasking manager for preparedness, where we focus on that collaboration more and on the data quality more, because we have more time and we just don't need to be so fast. So that could be.
Thank you for that.
Um, what would be an example of collective intelligence of changes that we need to make in the tasking manager to have more collective intelligence?
So and an option that we have discussed and that you kind of started implementing is maybe not only, so for example, we didn't discuss another issue that there is, that there's a huge bottleneck in the validation phase, right? Because mostly advanced people validate. So if we go, there's this slide a bit before this one, yeah, this one. So if we see from whenever a task is mapped until it gets logged for validation, the average is 13 days. So a task gets still for an average of 13 days. That's almost 2 weeks, right? So still, even though it's built for speed, it's still lacking in some aspects, right? Because the validation phase gets just done by advanced users. Why don't we also try to implement a validation that gets done by multiple beginners in a map swipe type of way? And I think map swipe already has implemented that in a way, but maybe we could try working on that and seeing if that's a possible way to fix other tasking manager issues, such as the timeliness of this validation, in a collective way. Because as the wisdom of the crowd says, a lot of beginners, a lot of not experienced users may produce a better result than an experienced one. So let's use that 90% of beginner users that we have and engage them more so they contribute more than once. And that could be a way, or maybe some other way that they could map as well and try to engage them more than just mapping once and then leaving. So maybe something like this. Thank you.
Okay. One more question at the back. Oh yeah. I'll repeat it.
I think two things. I think the study is very interesting. So kudos to that. Though I feel that it misses the community dimension of the study because you're just focusing on the
It misses the community
also a good
dimension
perspective
of the
to
study.
take into account. Uh, so I think like the effort of trainer mappers, really good mappers who turn into really good trainers are missing this characteristic. Secondly, I think it's very interesting that and is there any promising research later on maybe looking at backswipe, macrolet, because these are also tools and potentially comparing it with Raspberry.
So we have not looked at MapSwipe yet, but for me, it's a tool that could integrate very well with Tasking Manager, and in fact, I think it should go further and integrate way more with the tasks that they are in Tasking Manager. And about MapRoulette, we're currently doing research about MapRoulette, although not so much in the humanitarian realm, but more on the commercial organizations because they're using MapRoulette a lot, and seeing how are people reacting to that and contributing to that. So hopefully in some months that's out. And what was the community aspect as well? Yeah, here we mostly focused on the data from the logs. So of course, all that community aspect may be missing, right? So for some of the things like why are Filipinos mapping in Latin America, we just have to guess. We don't have maybe the community aspect to answer that, right? So we could just get some some conclusions from the data, but of course they're incomplete. They're missing that social aspect as well. Yes. Thank you.
One final question in Venuless. As a validator, I prefer to make the edits myself when looking at month-old edits. Uy, someone spammed Venuless. Wait, wait. Okay. Is that the right approach? And how do we bring validators online as the task list requiring validation grow?
I mean, that's what we've been seeing with our data is that validators are actually mapping a lot of the times. But I understand it in a way because whenever you move it back, then it takes more time for the task to be completed. And then you also need more time from the validators to then do a second validator. So are we then missing people to do the validation? And then again, I go back to my previous question. Should we also bring beginners to the validation? There could be issues with that as well, but we have so little number of advanced people that they are overworked and they cannot do all the validation in time. So why not bring in more people to validate? That could be maybe a way that that could get solved. Or training more people so they become advanced, and then we have a bigger pool of validators as well. Or who knows? Yeah. Thank you for everything, for all the questions.
Thank you, Hector, and thank you to everyone who asked questions here in person and in Venuless. I guess the last person really wanted this question to be asked because they really spammed the Venuless. But unfortunately, we don't have the time. So if you're here, if you're here, you can approach Hector, ask him personally. Maybe you can have a longer conversation. Okay, so that brings us to the afternoon break. So there will be some snacks outside. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Hector, to Radim, to Daniel for your presentations and the energy that you brought into the room.